The following podcast contains discussions of, you know what? To be safe, just assume that everything's a trigger in this minisode. We're going to be talking about many controversial things relating to sex, politics, and religion, so please wish me luck with this can of worms I'm about to open. But hey, no spoilers. Unless real life is a spoiler? I don't know. Let's just get on with it. Hi, I'm Gabby, and this is Digestibles, a podcast about all the books you were told not to read, but probably did. Wait. Wasn't it the other way around? Psych! Not today. Today, we're celebrating Banned Books Week. In advance! Because it's my podcast and I do what I want. And for those who are hearing about Banned Books Week for the first time, it's an annual celebration set during the last week of September that brings together the entire book community to promote awareness to all the books that have been banned or censored throughout history. These are books that were removed from schools and libraries or restricted in countries because their ideas were too dangerous for public consumption. And banned books are more common than you realize. Most of them are even bestsellers. For example, the Harry Potter series, arguably the most popular book series of our time. It has been consistently challenged in some communities because it encourages witchcraft. Sheesh, what century is this? Anyway, did you know that the first printed book to be banned in England was the English translation of the New Testament? No, really, it was against the law for us normal folk to read the Bible because only those educated enough in Greek and Hebrew were qualified to read it. Namely, the upper class and the clergy. Copies were seized and burned, and Henry VIII had the translator executed in 1536. Now, who says books can't get you killed? And of course, there's the constant banning of books that are too gay or too lesbian or because they deal with themes like racism. It doesn't even have to be serious business all the time. Some books can get banned for having poor spelling or bad writing. Yeah, that's right, I am looking at you, 50 Shades of Grey. Yeah, starting off as Twilight fanfiction, I've read better. But for this list, we're going to talk about the books that were banned, censored, or challenged repeatedly for years in many, many countries. Books that could get a person fined, jailed, or even killed for reading them. Yikes. Anyway, so I want you guys to sit back, relax, and let us celebrate our freedom to read as we count down the top 10 most banned books of all time. Number 10. The Catcher in the Rye by Jd Salinger. Hailed as the definitive book on teenage rebellion, the struggles of one 16-year-old Holden Caulfield with alcohol, sex, and feelings has had parents all shook since its publication in 1951. It was banned in Ireland in October of the same year, and from 1960 to 1982, it was the most censored book in schools and libraries in the United States. It was also one of the most taught, which is why the ban hammer falls so frequently on it. Parents were so angry they were forced to do math. One counted as much as 785 profanities. For another, it reached 860. I guess it depends on what one would personally count as curse words. Even until 2010, the book was continuously challenged for having offensive language, sexual content, and, in essence, being unsuitable for young audiences. Of course, parents still don't get that the more you tell a teenager not to do something, the more they want to do it. The book remains a bestseller, selling at least 1 million copies every year. Number 9. A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway. Some books get banned for being so accurate it annoys an entire country. Well, an entire country's government anyway. Hemingway was a journalist before he enlisted in World War I. He served as an ambulance driver in the Italian front until 1918 when he was seriously wounded. He used his experiences in the war to write his novel, which was published in 1929. Like most of the books on this list, it had a bit too much sex in it. One complaint in 1980 labeled it a quote-unquote sex novel. It was banned in Boston, USA in 1929, Germany in 1933, and Ireland in 1939. But his worst offense? Describing too well the bloody loss of Italy's forces in the Battle of Caporetto in 1917. The government, headed by dictator Mussolini, did not approve of this, and the book's heavy anti-war sentiment, so they banned publication of it in Italy until 1948. In 1943, an attempt was made to translate it to their language, and the translator was arrested for being anti-Italian. Harsh. Number 8. Tropic of Cancer by Henry Miller. Writers are often told to write what they know. Henry Miller was advised to write as you feel and think. The result was a semi-autobiographical tale about writers and artists in early 1930s Paris that included all his thoughts and feelings that were, to put it mildly, frank and filthy. In fact, in the middle of this novel's many obscenity trials in the US in the 1960s, one judge would even declare it was not a book but an open sewer, and all that is rotten in the debris of human depravity. The first edition was confiscated so often that for its second printing, the book had to have a plain wrapper around its dust jacket to make it more anonymous. Booksellers in the US would even be arrested for simply stocking it in their shelves. Finally, in 1964, it was officially declared as not obscene and allowed to be legally published and sold. Outside the US, it was banned in Canada from 1938 to 1964, in South Africa until the 1980s, in Turkey in 1986, and though it wasn't officially banned in the UK, only smuggled copies would be available for decades. From 1962 to 1970, the Finnish translation was censored in Finland, but the book was available in both Swedish and English. Number 7. The Jungle and Oil by Upton Sinclair. Socialism. That dirty word. Mustn't get people angry over the idea that capitalism is a flawed system that results in the abuse of people unlucky enough to be at the bottom of the food chain. Not that socialism doesn't have its own problems. Anyway, published in 1906, The Jungle is about the shockingly harsh working conditions of immigrants in the American meatpacking industry during the early 20th century. It was banned in Yugoslavia in 1929, Germany in 1956, and South Korea in 1985. In the meantime, Oil! Is about bribery and corruption in the American oil industry. It also had a lot of sex. That other dirty word that censors don't like. And the then controversial use of, contraceptives? Yeah, safe sex, so terrible. Oh, come on, you guys. Anyway, this led similar bans in Boston, USA in 1927, Yugoslavia again in 1929, South Africa in 1938, and Ireland in 1953. Both books were also burned by the Nazis in Germany in 1933. Don't feel too bad for Upton Sinclair, though. He got his revenge in 1943 when he won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction, one of the highest book awards a writer can get, for his novel about, you guessed it, Nazis. And speaking of Nazis, number 6, Minkampf by Adolf Hitler. Eesh, I feel a bit dirty even talking about this book, but well, can't argue with the data. This 1925 manifesto for all things Nazi and anti-Semitic was banned in several countries like Austria, Poland, Guatemala, and Russia for decades due to its glorification of said Nazism and racism. After Hitler's death in 1945, the copyright was transferred to the state of Bavaria, and they refused the printing of the book in Germany. They tried to block in other countries too, only they were less successful at it. That is until 2016 when it entered the public domain. With the rise of neo-Nazism and white supremacy in the modern world, this is one ban that's a bit understandable, in the sense that it's better to read editions which are heavily annotated or ones that offer a critical view of the text in relation to history and the Holocaust. In March 2020, the biggest bookstore on Earth, Amazon, removed most editions of the book for sale. leaving only the ones that provided educational context. Number 5. Animal Farm by George Orwell. Allegory, satire, fable, and fairy tale. Animal Farm was a thinly veiled critique of communism under the brutal dictatorship of Joseph Stalin. Its trouble started even before publication, when no one wanted to touch the manuscript, as it would upset the tense alliance of the US, UK, and the USSR against, you guessed it, those pesky Nazis again. Finally published in 1945, the book would be banned by various governments at various times due to its dangerous political ideas. So dangerous that in 1977, a government minister in Malawi was tried and hanged for treason, and one of the evidences presented against him was his possession of this banned book. In 2002, it was banned from schools in the UAE for having talking pigs, something that's against Muslim values. This ban was later lifted. However, it remains banned in Cuba and North Korea and censored in Vietnam. Weirdly enough, the book itself isn't banned in China, but as of 2018, any mention of it on social media is. Number 4. Ulysses by James Joyce. What's more serious than banning a book? Burning it. And I know a couple of books in this list were already part of the Great Nazi Book Bonfire in 1933, but for a change, this one was burned in more places. Yay? Between 1918 and 1923, it was burned in England, Ireland, Canada, and the USA. Since it's one of those famously hard-to-read books, maybe they just really hated it. After all, it's not called Burning Hatred for nothing. Ulysses began as a serial in 1918 in a literary magazine. An infamous chapter of, let's just call it self-love, led to an obscenity trial in 1921, which banned the book for a decade in the US. In 1933, another trial was held. United States versus one book called Ulysses. The judge declared that the book was not pornographic and so could not be obscene, and the ban was finally lifted. A win for everyone's freedom of expression. The case also helped cancel the bans in England, Ireland, and Australia in the 1930s, but that wouldn't be the end of the book's censorship troubles. From 1941 to 1953, it would be restricted again in Australia to over 18s, and in Spain, the translation was suppressed from 1945 to 1962. Number 3. Lolita by Vladimir Nabakov. You know a book is controversial when it gets banned in France, of all places. France! The country known for all things risque, where all the incredibly naughty books go to get published. Even this one. The contents of which were so scandalous, it was rejected by 5 of the big American book houses before finally being published in France in 1955. Why all the fuss, you may ask? Well, it's because it's about a grown-ass adult's creepy obsession with his 12-year-old stepdaughter. And the book is so often grossly romanticized that some people even call it a love affair, and hey, pedophiles have feelings too. Oh, sorry. Let me vomit a little. Ugh, I feel dirty just saying that. Anyway, even Nabokov called the book's narrator horrible. Let's just all agree that it's abuse no matter how well written the character is. So, not surprisingly, throughout the late 1950s and early 1960s, the book would be banned during various times in France, England, Argentina, Burma, Belgium, Canada, New Zealand, and in some local communities in the USA. In South Africa, it was only taken off the banned book list in November of 1982. Number 2. Lady Shatterly's Lover by D.H. Lawrence. Another landmark case against censorship was the trial of Lady Shatterly's Lover in the UK in November 1960. The book, about a married woman's affair with a gamekeeper, was published privately in Italy and France in the late 1920s. But his British publisher would not print it unless it was heavily edited. Lawrence did not agree, and it was only after his death in 1932 when the censored novel was distributed in England against his wishes. Around 30 years after his death, Penguin Books decided to release the full text to the alarm of the UK government. What came next was a high-profile 5-day trial that ended with the book being declared as literature and not pornography. The first print of the full text would then sell out in 1 day. While all that was happening, the book was also banned in various times between 1929 and the 1960s in Ireland, Poland, Japan, Canada, India, and the USA. The longest ban in Australia lasted until 1965. Even the book about the infamous trial was banned. In China, the translation was denied publication in 1936, and in 1987, distribution was stopped as they feared the book would corrupt the minds of young people against Chinese tradition. End quote. Number 1. The Satanic Verses by Salman Rushdie. In 1988, award-winning writer Salman Rushdie sprinkled some of his signature magical realism all over the founder of Islam in the name of fictional creativity. The literary world loved this aesthetic. The Muslim community? Not so much. Part of it was because throughout the book, Rushdie referred to the Prophet Muhammad as Mahund, an ancient word that means false god. No wonder they were pissed. Rushdie apologized, but it was way too late. The book was declared blasphemous, and by 1989 it was banned in 13 countries with large Muslim communities. To make things worse, the spiritual leader of Iran at the time issued a fatwa or kill order against the author. There were riots and mobs, book burnings, and bookstore bombings. People died, including the Japanese translator who was stabbed to death in 1991. The Italian translator and Norwegian publishers were also attacked and seriously wounded. The fatwa was criticized by some Muslims, but it has not been revoked. Today, the ban has extended to a whopping 22 countries and is also restricted for sale in a few others. Owning or reading the book in Venezuela is even a crime that can get you 15 months in prison. That's insane. But, all things considered, it is understandable. You always remember your first. Well, okay. Speaking of firsts, I'm not too sure if this counts as a banned book, or I don't think it's that controversial either, but I did read Anne Rice's The Mummy when I was around 11. I actually was a huge fan of hers at that age. Anyway, about this book, I don't remember it too well, but I do recall it being a little, well, it was a little scandalous for an 11-year-old to be reading. That's what I remember, but I could be wrong. Of the list, though, I do have a favorite, I guess. It was the way it was written, but I really, well, reading Lolita was a trip. It was an experience. Yeah, I liked how it was written. The controversy around it, not so much. And admittedly, I have, out of curiosity, I have picked up, I guess. Well, I haven't really read it. It's just there. But yeah, Minkampf. It's more of wanting to get into the mind of the author. But yeah, don't worry guys, I am not an apologist. I mean, I take the fact that it is written by a dictator seriously. I just will take the readings with a grain of salt, I guess. Well, I've told you mine. Now you tell me yours with the hashtag #DigestiblesPodcast. And if you haven't read a banned book yet, pick any book mentioned here and get started. Thanks for listening, you guys. I'm Gabby, and you can find me at Gabby Pasquavox on Instagram or Twitter. Feel free to tag me and tell me all about your banned book stories. Special thanks to Jazz for composing our theme music. Tune in next week for our next episode where we get back to our regular programming. See you next week. Bye! Digestibles is part of Connect, a podcast network, bringing together entertaining stories to spark your imagination. For more awesome content, follow us on social media @Connect Podcasts.